Good morning to one and all present here. My name is Mishti and I am from Indian School Al Mabela. My today's topic is measures to control inflation and deflation. Before I start, let me take an example. Whenever we go to a supermarket, we purchase for our regular goods, like cooking oil, vegetables, fruits, right? So there are certain changes that we keep noticing every week. And we think why that changes occur in our everyday life. For example, I remember last week I went to the supermarket, I saw the price of cooking oil somewhere around 2 real, 3 real for one cooking oil. But then when I noticed it during this week, I noticed it has declined. Why did that decline happen? And why was it more that last week? So let's evaluate that why that happens. Let's get started with what inflation is. Inflation is basically the rise in the price of goods and services occurring in an economic period over a period of time. So let's take an example that we have taken here, which is onion. Onion we purchase it's a staple thing in our life, but it costs rupees 20 per kg during one period of time, but it increased to rupees 40. That increase for per kg of onion is called as inflation. Next, we have deflation. Deflation is basically the decline in the price of goods and services in an economy during a significant period of time. That means that whenever there is a decline in any price, for example, as I took example of a cooking oil, it declined. It would not increase that sudden moment. It will decline for some period of time. Eventually it might increase, but it will keep declining down. We have taken an example of wheat, rice, all these you don't usually see an increase in price. You will always see a decline in price. That is called as deflation. Now there are three causes of inflation: demand pull inflation, cost pull inflation and built-in inflation. Now demand pull inflation is basically whenever any goods or services are produced, if the demand of them keep increasing in the economy, so does the company increase the prices of them. So that's why the prices keep increasing. Then we have cost push inflation. That means that, for example, if I had a company and I produce markers, for example, and one marker for rupees 100 was the production cost, and I sold it for 120 then as my profit margin. But later on, as I added new features, new packaging, new labeling, the prices increased of the production. It went to 140. So what would I do? I would also increase the price even more. So that would cause more increased price for the consumers. So that's cost pull inflation. Then there is built-in inflation. This is basically a cycle that occurs in inflation. Basically, the wages of the employees, they expect an increase in the wages. So whenever they expect, we give them as an increase. But later on, when we are paying them extra amount of money, we also increase the cost of the goods because we need to cover up that cost. When we go to cover up that cost, it also then again increases the wages of the employees because they want to also maintain their life. For that case, we have to increase both the cost everywhere. So that is a cycle in the inflation, which is built-in inflation. Then there are certain causes of deflation. Technological innovations. Whenever there are any technological additions in our goods or services, that would eventually cause a decline. One second. Yeah, because when we are producing any good, for example, as I told markers, if I add a new technology and I make the product, what will happen is there will be more production of the goods in my factory, which will eventually decline in the cost of the markers. Increase in productivity. If my business has more productivity, it produces around 1,000 units of markers per day, and then I increase the productivity even more with new technology and it becomes 2,000 units per day, that would eventually cause a decline in the good price. Decrease in money supply. If the amount of money that is available with the public is very less, so what I would do is also decline in the price of the goods so that they are able to buy the goods that I am selling. Increase in saving. When consumers keep more amount of money with themselves and don't actually go and purchase a product, eventually the business would have to decline in the price of the goods so that they have some sales going on in their company. Debt inflation. Debt inflation is a situation when the falling prices increases the real debt of the company. Okay. Now that I come centrally to my topic, which was measures of controlling money supply, we'll typically take the example of RBI. There are two examples, quantitative and qualitative. Now quantitative includes bank rate, repo rate, cash reserve ratio, statutory liquidity ratio, reserve repo rate, and open market operation. In qualitative, we have margin requirement and moral cessation. We'll first jump into the quantitative, which includes bank rate. Now bank rate is the rate of interest at which the banks provide loans to the commercial banks. Now if we see, there are two situations occurring. One is how do they control it during inflation. Now whenever the banks have to provide loans to the commercial banks, if they see that there is an inflation going on, they would first increase the bank rate. Now when they increase that, the overall market rate of interest at which the loan is provided increases. That eventually causes the rise of capital for the banks to raise money. And then it declines the demand, because as they see that the prices are too high for getting a loan, or the interest rate is too high, they won't get the credit. So it will fall in the demand for credit, and which will eventually fall in the amount of money available with them, and then the inflation is controlled. Same goes the opposite with deflation. When deflation occurs, they increase the bank rate, because they want that the amount of money that they give, it decreases with the people. So there is a fall in bank rate, which will eventually lead to fall in market rate of interest, and then the fall in cost of capital, which also rises in the demand of credit, because we are falling. Before we were increase the bank rate. When we increase the bank rate, people won't go for more loans. But now that we have declined in the bank rate, they would go and purchase for more. And then there's a rise in supply of money that causes deflation, and deflation is controlled because they get more amount of money now with them. There's a repo rate. The difference between repo rate and bank rate was a long period loan that was provided to the commercial banks, but wherein repo rate is a short period loan using the government securities. So in this also, during inflation, they will cause a rise in the repo rate, which will lead to rise in the cost of capital, and then the fall in credit demand, and then fall in supply, wherein the inflation is controlled. During deflation, there is a fall in repo rate, which leads to fall in the cost of capital, rise in demand for credit, and then rise in supply of money, and then the deflation is controlled. Cash reserve ratio. Now cash reserve ratio is wherein, for example, I'll take this as a bank. Okay, they have some amount of money with them, and there's a cash reserve ratio. Now what does cash reserve ratio mean? Cash reserve ratio means that some amount of money that the banks have to be kept with the RBI, just as a security with them. So for example, today the cash reserve ratio was 10%. So some amount of this money will be kept with the RBI, and the rest money will be used for credit. This cash reserve ratio plays a significant role in controlling inflation and deflation, because whenever there is an inflation going on, what would they do is they will decrease the CRR. I'm so sorry, it's an increase. Okay, so what they would do is they would increase the CRR. So now, for example, this was my stable CRR. I would increase my CRR to 20%. So now what would happen is, whatever amount I had, more amount I would keep with the RBI, and I would have very less amount left with me for giving out to the public. And then during deflation, I would decrease it. Now if this was 10, I shifted to 5%. Now if I shifted to 5%, I would have more amount to give out to the public. So then the money supply will increase with the public. Statutory liquidity ratio. Now, as I told, in cash reserve ratio, only the cash of the banks will have to be kept with the commercial banks. In this case, the current assets or the liquid assets which are there with the public, which is there with the banks, for example, cash, gold, and securities. So during inflation, they would increase the SLR. So then we would have to keep more amount of liquid assets with the RBI, which will eventually lead to decreased amount of money which is kept with them to give out for credit. As I explained here, if I increase the percentage, that would eventually lead to very less amount which I can give to the public. If the amount is very less, that means that I'm giving out less money, so the inflation is controlled. But if I eventually decline and then I go and then I have more amount of money which I can give out, so the deflation will be controlled. The difference between CRR and SLR is that SLR has cash, gold and securities, wherein CRR is only the cash that is kept with them. Reverse repo rate. This is the rate at which the RBI accepts deposits from commercial banks using government securities. So they sign a contract between the commercial bank and the RBI that they would purchase some amount of securities, and then after that they would buy that back from them at a certain amount of price with the interest rate. So that is reverse repo rate. Then we have open market operations. In this, on behalf of the government, the RBI sells security. So in the last thing that we learned, the reverse repo rate, in this the government securities are sold, but in this the RBI does it on behalf of the government. So it soaks liquidity by selling the securities, and it purchases it for the releasing of the liquidity. So there's during inflation, the sale of securities by RBI rises, it soaks liquidity, then it leads to fall in the cash reserve of commercial banks, fall in credit creation, and then there's a fall in money supply and inflation is controlled. Let me explain that to you. For example, there is RBI, and RBI goes in and then they sells the securities to the people. Now when they sell the securities, they'll get some amount of money. So that money they would keep it with themselves, and they would sign a contract saying that I would buy from you later on. Now when that happens, when they are buying it from the commercial bank or the open market, so what happens is they are getting more and more amount with them, so the inflation is controlled, because now the public does not have a huge amount of money kept with them, but it is kept with the RBI. In that case, when it goes to deflation, they are now, that contract that they had signed, that I would purchase it back from you, now they have purchased it back. So now what happens, the money is gone back to the public. So the public has more money to spend now to purchase goods and services. Now we go to qualitative instruments. The first is margin requirement. It is the difference between the current value of securities offered for loan and the value of loan granted. For example, when we go to a bank, okay, and we want to buy a land, that land cost 1 lakh rupees. Okay, so we go to the bank, we say we want to buy this land, it's for 1 lakh, I would like to get a loan for that 1 lakh. So the government would not just give you that 1 lakh away just like that. They would actually look at the inflation and deflation rates going on and then accordingly give you. So you would go, you would say you want 1 lakh rupees. They would look at the inflation and deflation rates that are going on and accordingly grant you. For example, if inflation was going on at that point of time, then they would, deflation, okay. If deflation was going on, they would have granted you the whole 1 lakh, but if inflation would have granted you, maybe they would have just given you 80,000. Now why would that happen? Because they know that there's a lot of money that is there in the money supply is huge, so they would provide you only lesser amount than the actual value that you needed. But during deflation, that they know the money supply is very less, so they would provide you the same amount that you asked them for. Then there's moral succession. This is basically just an advice that the commercial banks have been given. This advice is that, for example, they'll just tell that like if inflation is going on, they'll be informed that, you know, please don't provide that much loans, decrease the rate and don't give that many loans to a lot of people, increase the bank rate if it's needed, and during deflation give out liberal loans, how much ever they ask for. There's a formula in which you can find rate of inflation. It is A2 minus A1 divided by A1 into 100, wherein the A1 signifies the wholesale price index for week 1 and the A2 signifies wholesale price index for week 2. this is the current, this is till now the inflation and deflation in India that has occurred. In 1974, there was an inflation of 28.60%, and in 2013, there was an inflation of 12.17%, and in 2009, there occurred a deflation of 1.6%. The highest inflation and deflation that has occurred in the world, Argentina is the highest and the China is the least. In conclusion, controlling inflation and deflation is very important for the economic health. Effective measures are used to control like interest rates, reverse repo rate, etc. to control them and that the economy runs stable. Thank you. Any other questions?
How would you explain the difference between inflation and deflation to a second grader?
Okay. Inflation basically, I'm so sorry, can I get your question again?
How would you explain the difference between deflation and inflation to a second grader?
Second reader. Okay. I would basically start with an example as I started with the cooking oil example. Examples play a very important key role in remembering. So I think as I told, cooking oil, as you see the prices always either increase or decline. There's always shift in the prices that are going on. So whenever you see that there's a significant rise in the price of some good that you have seen a stable price going on. For example, if you see the cooking oil example, like if the price was 2 real stable for like a month or so, but then all of a sudden you see there's a very big decline or the increase is going on too much. Like for example, from 2 it just went to 3.5 or 4. So then you are seeing there's such a big increase that is going on. What would be the reason? Is that inflation is going on in the country. You can see that the money capacity with the people is high. So then they increase it so that the money becomes stable. And then if you see there's a very big decline going on, from 2 it just went to 1. So then you can know that deflation is going on and the money supply with the people is less. I hope you answered the question.
So you said only one part.
Both with the example, if you see a decline and an increase. Any other question? Yeah. Yeah, for example, if the prices of any good is declining, I'm not really sure about the topic, but just a brief that I know. If there is a decline going on, so what would happen? Deflation would occur and the prices would fall. So the real value of debt would increase. Yeah.
Inflation. So why do countries even suffer it in the first place? Can't they just use these measures? She said the China example,
Yeah.
where China is going through deflation right now.
Yeah.
So can't they just use these measures?
The thing is that the situations of each country differ. Some developed, some underdeveloped. So the rate at which they use the measures can differ. The examples that I took forward were from RBI, which is under India. So then they could easily use these measures. But other countries have their own rules, their own regulations going on. So their economic stability differs from our country.
But even India has suffered with inflation and deflation.
Yeah, but they have come back to stability also, and then they have declined also. It takes, because such a huge country with such a huge population takes some amount of time for coming back to its stability. That's it. Yeah.
Could you provide a better example? Because in that slide,
Yeah.
you showed that causes of inflation, technological innovations.
Yes.
So could you provide another example?
Yeah. Sure. For example, iPhone launches each new product every year. We expect a product with new features all the time. So whenever there's an advancement going on, the base phone is always the same. Whatever the phone is, the phone that they always sell, but there are new added features that they keep adding and they sell. So when new technology is added and such a bulk products are made in one manufacturing unit, the prices of each unit keeps decreasing for them. For example, if you are a firm and I'm a firm, you produce phones, you produce for 100 units maybe. So your price may be 45 real per unit. But then the same phone, I am manufacturing it maybe 2,000 units. So my price would decline. Why? Because I am manufacturing more, and also the technologies that I am using for manufacturing, the prices in each unit that I am using that technology decreases. Anything else?
What is LRR? Legal reservation.
What is?
Legal reservation.
I'm not sure about the topic, so sorry.
Any practical real life example of moral suasion done very recently by the RBI?
Moral suasion. I think the recent that I know about was COVID-19, because during COVID-19 there were a lot of people that needed healthcare assistance. So during that time, they've had provided loans for a lot of people without actually, declining the loans rate. Thank you. Thank you.